So today we are going to have a session led by Chaithra, and Chaithra is an iOS engineer at TradeStation, an online brokerage firm. She works on an app for trading US equities. She's a self-taught iOS developer with over 3 years of experience. She's currently exploring all things Swift Concurrency and SwiftUI framework. So she's perfect for this. And before being an iOS developer, she was an Oracle database developer for several years. So thank you so much, Chaithra. You're awesome, and it's all yours now.
Thanks, Navati. Let me share my screen. Monitor. Do you guys see?
Yeah, we see the now we see the book emerge.
Okay, that's good. Okay. Then. Okay. So Monica asked me to fill for her a couple of days back. I was not prepared. So in the past 2 days, I've been reading the book, didn't get a chance to work through the code. So let's see if we can figure it out. If you have any questions, we can try to answer, or we can probably get to it later on Slack. What did everybody feel about the 2 chapters?
I haven't gone through like chapter 6. Time got by me, but chapter 5 was pretty cool. I guess the only thing I didn't understand for chapter 5 was like the focusing state part. Just because I was like, what am I looking at when I ran the code? It just wasn't, I don't know, in my face about it. I didn't know what I was supposed to notice. But other than that, I think like it was cool. Like everything's a list basically in every app. Yeah.
I felt it was okay, but he was rushing through a few of the things and started using Combine and Swift Concurrency before introducing those topics. I know them a bit, so I was able to understand, but somebody starting new probably would have got overwhelmed with all the information coming in without proper introduction. But I think in this field, you always end up knowing a little bit of something, even though you don't know it in depth. So I guess it's okay. So I'll use the same format Monica did. I marked a few places. I have some notes, some comments, and we can discuss about it. Okay, lists. So lists are very similar to UIKit's table. And you can use any of the built-in views within a list row, or you can use any of your custom views as well. As he says, if you have any custom rows, then try to create a separate view for them so you can dynamically put them within the list views view builder. So that is a good thing. I have used it in my app by refactoring the row views to a separate file and reusing it over and over again, or through, by looping through it based on the data model. I guess he gives an example here as well. Then, the list rows. Here's something interesting. Until now, we were just using a view, and by default, it was giving us the member-wise initializer. And this was the first time he introduced a custom initializer with some of the parameters set to default values. So this is another good way of modifying your view based on your requirements. Simple views you can manage by using just the member-wise initializer, but this was interesting. You can even extend this approach by creating view models within the initializer based on some input from the calling function. I think he does that probably in forms later on, or in this chapter, I'm not sure, but this is a good concept to learn. In all the books I have read, generally we just limit it to the member-wise standard default initializer. So this is a good thing. And another thing I noticed here is he converts UI colors into the SwiftUI colors. This is a good thing because some of the standard colors I have seen, it's not available in SwiftUI. So by converting this to from UI color to color, SwiftUI's color, you have at your disposal various other colors as well. And of course, using iflet within the view builder, that's also a good way of checking before you display a subview. Then let's see. Any comments until then? Okay, I think I should go this way. Yeah, static views are useful for creating menus or setting screen. Yeah, so nothing changes there. There is no view model, there's no state changes. So you just use static views with just probably some basic built-in views. But if you want to change your list dynamically based on some network response, then you start creating your own views. Yeah, this is very interesting. Pull to refresh on lists. It's built in, so you can just use a view modifier to call a asynchronous function, and that adds the progress view on the top, which opens up while the view modifier's closure is running, and once the closure completes, it just moves back up. There was an important lesson learned on the production app I was working on regarding this. I'll talk about it towards the end. And then he talks about creating lists like this based on a collection, random access collection. This is a protocol. So our regular arrays and do I have? Yeah, array conforms to this collection. So you can just have it like this and loop through the elements within the array to build out your list row. So that's a good feature. And here, yeah, this is the data model behind the view. He uses this struct book to display the list rows. And one of the things he does not mention, or I might have missed it, I'm not sure, is conforming it to identifiable. When you create a list like this, by default, if you don't give an ID, it expects your collection to conform to identifiable. So that way it can identify which row goes with which element. So it is really important that if you're using list in this format, have your model conform to identifiable. You can create an ID like this, or in our case, ISBN is unique to books, right? So you can probably have a computed property called ID, which would return ISBN, and that would do as well. And I think this is a good question we can ask the author when he comes. All the examples I have seen, the state variables, state objects, they have been either declared private or they are internal by default, right? Access modifier. But he uses file private a lot. So I'm interested to know why he doesn't talk about it. I don't know if anybody has figured it out or not. The reason why you would use file private is because if you want to modify this property in this structure from another object structure from outside its definition, but within the same file, then you would use file privates. But given that these variables are state objects or state, why do you want to change it from outside the view's purview? I don't know. I could not figure that out. Did anybody find an answer to it? He doesn't talk about why he uses file private instead of private there. That was something interesting and I mean odd as well. I think most of his examples, if you see in GitHub, not most, a few of them, he specifically uses file private. And When I looked at this particular program, it didn't have anything else in that file, which was modifying this property. So it would be interesting to ask him why he chose file private instead of private over there. Okay. Since we are not planning to modify the data inside the list row or inside a details view, we pass the list item to the row as a simple reference. If we wanted to modify the data inside this list row, example by marking a book as a favorite or passing it on a child screen where the user can edit the book details, we would have to use a list binding. So what this means here is the book is being passed to this view as a variable. This is like a property. This is a property for the struct. Unlike you creating a binding or an observed object, this is kind of associated with the structure itself. It's part of the structure. So every time this changes, the view is re-rendered. That is what he means by that. And I saw this video a few days back. I think Monica was telling about his YouTube channel. This is a very interesting video. He gives a few ways to refactor your code. If you have time, you should watch this. It's on page 120. Normally, data inside a view is unmodifiable. To modify data, it needs to be managed as a state property or an observed object. That's what we talked earlier. To allow users to modify a data in a child view, like in text field or detail screen, we need to use a binding to connect the data in the child view to the state in the parent view. So the parent view actually owns the data, but child view gets a reference to it and has the privilege of changing it. Once the child view changes it, those changes are not just seen by the child view, but the parent also sees it. So that way, it reinforces Apple's requirement that we keep one source of truth always, and everybody sees it from all places. So if you change the state by changing this variable, then all the consumers know about it. So that makes sense there. So in this view editable book row view, we have a binding, because from this view, we are going to change the book. And since it's owned by another view, all views get to see the changes it makes. So in the text field, the user can enter a new title, and that gets updated in the original book model. This is what we talked about, source of truth. So some of the taglines Apple uses: source of truth, view, source of truth, view is a function of its state, separation of concerns. So all these things we have to keep in mind when we use SwiftUI. And then asynchronously fetching data. This was what I was talking about. Can I assume everybody knows about Swift concurrency and how the task modifier works? Or should I talk a little bit about those modifiers?
Maybe you can talk about it a little bit.
A little bit, okay. So let's take this example here. Before task was introduced in iOS 15, I think. Before then, we were using the onAppear modifier to start any asynchronous work. So what task makes it easy for us, we can start a process, it keeps running, but when the user moves away from this screen, or when this view goes out of memory, then this task is canceled. So within your function, you can cancel your work as well. So task's lifecycle matches with that of the view. And the closure it takes, it's an asynchronous closure, so you can use await if required, or you don't have to. It's just your preference. So if your app involves calling a backend server, then you can start the API calls here in .task. It gets started when the screen is first loaded. And then it processes it, and after getting the response, if you change the state, the view gets changed. And when the screen goes out of scope, the task, if it is still running, gets canceled. So that's a good place to start any of your API calls. Yeah, this is another thing. I think right from the beginning, we have been told do not make any changes to the UI from a background thread. So publishing changes from background threads is not allowed. Make sure you publish values from the main thread only. So if you're using Combine, you would use receive on. So the runtime error which you get from fetch data is because you're trying to update books here from the background thread. So if you want background thread, books is actually defines a state. So by changing books, your view gets changed. So that cannot happen from a background thread. If you're changing books, then you do it from the main thread. That's what he says. And this is another thing. So you can continue to use dispatch queue.main.async to just update books from the main thread, or with the introduction of Swift Concurrency, Apple introduced this attribute called main actor. So this function will run on the main thread. You don't have to explicitly dispatch your work onto main just before updating books. Another thing to note is this main actor can actually be attached to the class itself. So everything the class does happens on the main thread. Generally, if your view model is mostly used to drive the view and there is nothing which delays the work, you define the class with main actor. So everything you run in the class is run on the main thread. So that is extensively used these days. That's something to consider as well. But if in this case, he says just this part is used to change the view. So you can just attach the main actor attribute to the function itself instead of the entire class. Okay, next, pull to refresh. Yeah. So pull to refresh was added onto list, I think, with iOS 15. So if you just make if you drag the screen down, you'll see a progress indicator on the top, just like in all the popular apps. And once the work is done, it just closes back up. SwiftUI makes it easy to add this functionality to your app with just a few lines of code, thanks to its declarative nature. So this is what it does. And as mentioned earlier, this feature also makes use of Swift's new concurrency model to ensure that your app's UI remains responsive even while it needs to wait for any updates to arrive. So your app is not hanging when this closure is running. So it is still responsive. And like with task, you start an asynchronous process. And as soon as this ends, the view moves up, closing the progress view. There's something I wanted to tell about this. Let me see if I still have it open. Oh, that was the random access. So it looks like I don't have it. In iOS 15, you could use the refreshable modifier on lists, but if you want to use it on your custom views as well, there is another option for refresh action, I think. You can read through it. This is interesting as well. So this is how you do it on the list, but if you want to add it to a custom view or to any other view, in fact, you can make use of this environment variable called refresh. If it is available, then you run it. So from a calling function, you would assign a closure to this. And then that gets run, and you can have your view also changed to make sure that the user knows that the view is getting refreshed. Okay, let's see. One final adjustment before we can wrap up this section, you will notice that when adding new items to the list by pulling to refresh, the newly added items will appear instantly without a smooth transition. So you can add the animation to make it look nice. So yeah, you associate with this. So when this changes, the animation happens. Okay. Does this section come under? Okay, searching. Yeah, I have not used this before with a list, but I assume that you'll get the top text field with the search the magnifier icon and the X button at the end when you add this modifier. Again, he introduces Combine here for the first time. Did everybody figure this out? How what's the logic behind this particular initializer? Probably I can briefly speak. In this class, it conforms to observable object. That means it can have variables with the add_published property wrapper. What it does is just before this variable changes, it publishes it sends out a value through a publisher called object will change. The way you access that publisher is by accessing the projected value on this property wrapper. That projected value you get by using the $, just like when you get the binding. So we have the publisher here, original books, that has the samples, and the search term. So search term is also a published property. So you access the publisher there. So we have two publishers now. What Combine latest does is, whenever a new value is received on one of the publishers, it takes the latest from the other, combines the two into a tuple, and sends out to the downstream subscribers. This thing is there for, I think, even 3 or more number of publishers. I'm not very sure, but it just takes the latest value from the other publishers, combines with the results into a tuple, and sends it downwards. So if the user enters a search string, the new tuple we get consists of the array and the new search term. And based on that, you filter out the books. Whatever books match the search term will be assigned to books. So that is what is being done here. Then, I guess I spoke about that. Yeah, and styling lists. There are different styles you can use, and if you look at them, you'll figure out in all the different apps what kind of list styles have been used. I have mainly used plain, but others do look good as well. The main reason why I have not used others is because if you have to coordinate the colors with your app's color scheme, then it's not easy in iOS 15 to change it, but with iOS 16, it's easier. But I have stuck to plain for most of it. Even with plain, you have to do some behind the scenes magic to get things working, but it's not as difficult as others. And even headers and footers, I think it's there in almost like all the settings app on your device, iPhones. When you use section headers and headers, it is like a sticky header. So if you're scrolling through, the header sticks on top. So it's a nice user experience with that. And adding a badge, just like you have badge for your tab bars at the bottom, you can have a badge on a list row. It appears on the side, on the right side. If you have tried it, I have not tried the code yet, so I'm assuming, yeah. So this is the badge you'll see. And of course, you can change the color, the tint of the separator. You can hide it or unhide it. I had bad experience with this separator. Let me see if I can show in this. Yeah, so if you see in these tiles, let's see here, the separator kind of aligns with the text here, not with the logo. If your text is indented inside, then the separator also starts from there. So if you want to get a good UI, you have to make sure that that is what you want. If not, you have to hide the separator and add your own dividers later on if you want. Then we talked about badges. Yeah, okay. So this has been like, if you want to delete a row from the list, you do the swipe action, right? In order for that to work, you cannot use the loop with the list directly using the random access collection protocol we talked earlier. You cannot use it. You have to have a for each loop inside the list and have this modifier attached to for each. It has been like this since SwiftUI started. I don't know why they have not changed it, but as he says, it's quite interesting. I think in one of the footers, he mentions why it's still retained like that. And similarly, on move is on top of, on move is also on for each. So it's similar, I guess. For swipe actions, it's worth noting that swipe actions modifier is invoked on the view that represents the row. So you're not attaching it to the loop, but the row itself. In this case, it is a simple text view, but for more advanced lists, this might as well be a H stack or a V stack. This is different from the on delete modifier, which needs to be applied to the loop, not the row. And it gives us the flexibility to apply a different set of actions depending on the row. Also note that each swipe action is represented by a button. If you use any other view, SwiftUI will not register it and no action will be shown. Likewise, if you try to apply the swipe actions modifier to the list or for each loop, the modifier will be ignored. Yeah, so this will be a little frustrating until you figure out what needs to be applied, where it can take effect or it might not just take effect. One thing he didn't mention about is the background for the rows. So list rows, if you want to change the background, you cannot do it in one spot and have it applied to all the rows. You have to do it for each and every row. So that is, again, a painful thing to do it, but that's something you need to remember. If you change the background on the list itself, it doesn't take effect. So you have to do it for the rows. And he talks about the swipe action in the mail app. It's pretty neat. Until I read this chapter, I was not paying attention to how I was using it on the iPhone. It just happened, but once you learn about it, you'll figure out and you'll see, oh, this is what is happening behind the scene. So I have to try the code, but I'm not sure if the haptic feedback, which happens on the mail app, also automatically happen with all swipe actions or not. That's something I have to just wait and see and figure out. It will be nice if the haptic feedback happens automatically. Did anybody try the code for swipe actions? I guess not. Yeah, you can change the look and feel as well. In this case, it's this button is destructive, so it looks red. Yeah, so you can have swipe this way or that way. And also you can disable the full swipe by adding this parameter. Of course, you can change the tint as well. You have red for destructive, but for others, you can change the tint. Okay. Focus. Was that Julian who talked about focus not being, being a little confusing?
Oh yeah, that was me.
Oh, for Hannah, okay. Okay. Let's see, if you're entering a form, sometimes some of the fields are marked with an asterisk, they are required. But if you forget and you hit submit button, you're automatically taken to that field for you to enter the text, right? That is what is happening with focus.
Okay, so it's focusing on like the element, because I was thinking like it was gonna blur the background or something, because I remember seeing that in some apps. So I was like, where's the blur?
Yeah, it's just that it just takes you to that view so you can take action. That's it. Yeah, so in the example he gives, if you just enter the first name but not the last name and you hit submit, it takes a focus to the last name, so you can enter the last name there.
Interesting. So I can see it being very useful if like you have a lot of text to input with your keyboard.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, some kind of an input here, having the user enter. Yeah, so you can just have a Boolean if you have just a couple of fields. Excuse me. Or you can have an enum, and in a later example, he uses enum with an associated value. If you have like a dynamic number of views populated within the list, then you can have one enum with an associated value and change the focus based on that. I have to again try all these examples. They are really good, but I just had a couple of days, so I didn't try any. Yeah, so if you have a dynamic number of rows, then yeah, this is how you would do it. Let's see. Yeah, in this list, you have a for each loop for each of the element. Your focus is for this enum with the row enum with associated value of the ID. So if you change the associated value, then the focus takes you to that particular field. Probably we can try this out later on and post the screen recording on the Slack channel. That will be interesting as well. Yeah, this is another thing. Once you enter, hit the enter key for a text field, you can have anything execute using this modifier, on submit modifier. MVVM, model view model design pattern. I hope everybody knows about it. I guess I didn't mark anything here. Oh yeah, this was interesting. He says he likes the MVVM, and technically speaking, the UI element which needs the focus belongs to the view model, not the view itself. So he moves this focus state out of the view, but into the view model. But SwiftUI complains saying that this modifier, this property wrapper cannot be used outside of a view. So the way SwiftUI knows that is because this modifier conforms to this property wrapper conforms to dynamic property protocol, so which makes it only usable within the view itself. So in order to overcome this restriction, what he does is he has two pieces of information: the focus state within the view and the variable which controls it in the view model. When one changes, he goes and changes the other one. So he takes on the responsibility of keeping them in sync. Yeah, it is a little bit non-Swift UI kind of a thing, but I guess that's the only way if you want to strictly adhere to MVVM design pattern. Yeah, again, here he uses this publisher here Focused reminder is a published variable. So he accesses the publisher behind it using the projected value with the $sign, and then uses the other publishers, and he takes it through all of them, and finally he does the work of removing the reminders. And this is very similar to the reminder app we have on the iPhone, MacBook, everywhere. So that's interesting. I think I have a note here. Yeah, so I recently learned about it. I think it was a year or two before this kind of a pattern was introduced. You can use enumeration. This is called an enumeration case pattern. You can use with guard statement, with if, and with for. What it is doing here is it's doing a pattern match. So if your previous focused reminder has an enumeration case value of row, then it takes the associated value and assigns it to previous ID, and you can use previous ID within the scope. So that's a nice change to Swift. I've used it with if, but not with guard. So it's a good thing. I think later on he uses with for loop as well. So yeah, this is another good thing. I didn't know about the adding a delay through the pipeline. So that's interesting. And finally, coming to the summary, we're doing good on time. Okay. Some important lessons I learned while using lists on iOS 15. If you read through the notes, it was implemented using the UI kit stable view in the background. But with iOS 16, lists have the same look and feel, but it is implemented in a more native way in SwiftUI. So if you were using any any UI kit based changes, like in the appearance for the table view, underlying table view to modify your list, that won't work in iOS 16. So if your app is supporting both iOS 15 and iOS 16, and you are using lists and styling it, you need to handle it differently between the two versions. And then I talked about the refreshable modifier already. Yeah, I got that covered. Yeah, for SwiftUI, I use another book in case anybody is interested. That is also really good. It's called SwiftUI View Mastery by Mark Moykins, I think, Big Mountain Studio. So if you get a chance, take a look at his book. I just use it as on the side. If I have any questions about how to use a particular view, I just go and refer to it. It's like a reference book, but it's really, really useful for SwiftUI. Okay. Navati, shall I quickly finish forms as well? The next chapter. We have
yeah, I mean, go for it. And if there's something left, and if folks need to go, we can continue.
Yeah.
Or if you want, we can always just discuss what we thought about the chapter instead of going through the notes. Either ways.
Yeah, I'll see if I can finish within the next 10 minutes. Or if anybody has any thoughts or questions on lists, we can discuss that and keep this for an offline review.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
Yeah. What do you all say? Any questions or thoughts?
And if there's something that's still pending, like we still want to clarify, we can continue that discussion, in the next session too, if there's something left over in terms of clarification. So yeah, that works. But I know, like, chapter 5 was really long, and like you went through it really thoroughly, so really appreciate that.
Okay, so shall we just do a few pages and see how far we can go?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, we all know about forms. Yeah, this is a good thing. You have to keep this in mind. This is a recurring theme in SwiftUI. You as a developer or designer specify what you want to display, and SwiftUI will figure out the how. So keep that in mind, and then you can design your app. That's a very important principle. Yeah, the forms looks like UI table view. Then yeah, I talked about the indentation. You can see in this screenshot, the separator, it's aligned to the text here, not with the logo. So if you, for whatever reason, pull this inside, the separator also will start from there. So that might not be what you want. Then you might want to hide the separator and add a divider of your own. And again, identifiable, I already talked about that. Yeah, this was also something I didn't know about, using formatters with a text field. That's very handy. If your text field just accepts numbers, then use a formatter along with the definition, along with your usage here. So that helps. Yeah, that's what he does here. Yeah, drill down navigation is popular, probably best known for the built-in contacts app. Let's see what this is. So if you have a observable object, which almost all the views use, then you can send it in from the main app struct, so that all the children views get access to it. This makes sure our source of truth is shared among all windows of our application. This becomes important when your users run your application on a device that allows them to show multiple windows of your application at once. So even the shared windows see the same data, because your observable object is with the abstract and not the scene. Yeah, so we have the abstract here, and he's actually injecting the view model through the initializer. So we are in 186. Let's see here. Yeah, and then within the children views, you can get access to it using the observed object. If you're injecting it through the environment object, then you would use the environment object property wrapper here to get access to it. Yeah, so you'll notice how we make use of the navigation link to specify the destination view when the user taps on one of the books in the list. To pass on the binding, we make use of the $sign. This is also the projected value along with the navigation link. And he changes at state to at binding, because book details view is no longer the owner of this data. It's something else. It is just using it and getting the privilege of updating it. So we change at state to at binding there. Same thing. Okay. What is the effect of making this into a binding? I think I already covered it. Yeah, so this flag here, show edit book view, is changed when the button is pressed, and when the value changes, a sheet pops up from the bottom. When the user taps on the edit button on the book details view, we open a modal sheet to display book edit view. Actually, we can probably take this as a challenge, as an exercise. In contacts, when you click on the edit button, the view itself changes, right? From a display only to something editable like a form. So probably we can give that a try. Here, when you click on the edit button, a sheet comes from the bottom. So instead of that, we can figure out how it is done in contacts, the view itself changing. That will be a good exercise if you guys want to try it out. Yeah, because you're using binding and observed object property wrappers, all changes you make will be seen by the entire app. So here he has two versions of the app running here on the iPad, and if he changes one here, not just in this version, it changes in the other version as well. So that's something we can try it out. And then input validation, a couple more minutes. So if you want to validate your the user input before making it permanent, you can do it at this point. The way he does this is by sending in a binding. Using the wrapped value of that binding, he creates a view model and changes the view model. Those changes are not shown into the binding because he's just taking the wrapped value and taking a copy and making the view model. So you can do all your validations on the view model. And once you're happy with it, take that new input and go and change the binding. That way everything is validated and in sync. Yeah, separation of concerns, you're establishing that. Of course, we know this classes don't have automatic member-wise initializers, only structs get it, but you can override it to give your own custom initializers. And then actually in one of his talks, I don't know in which which YouTube video, he actually uses this example and he talks about it. If I find the link, I can send it to you, but he talks about this in great detail in that video. About this part, synchronizing with a copy and then updating the source of truth. We talked about it. Yeah, by instantiating a new observed object of book edit view model in book edit view, we establish a new source of truth. All your elements in book edit view are connected to this local source of truth. So all changes the user makes in the UI will only be reflected on this instance. So you can do the checks here. Once it is validated, go back and change the actual source of truth. So that's what he means. And of course, you can override the way the user dismisses the sheet. Yeah, so once the validation happens, he goes back and changes the original data. And this is also a good handy way of changing based on the publishers. There you go. I think we have come to the end. Yeah. Any questions? Thoughts? So for next week, should we go through 2 chapters or what do you feel? Was it too rushed this time?
Recording now and we'll continue this discussion.